All right, guys. Good morning. We're a little bit past time to get started here, but excited to have some visitors with us. For those visiting, we have been looking at this book titled "Co-Parenting with God." So many of the people in this room, actually, I think all the people in this room, are dealing with children or are looking to have kids. So this is a really good study if you're dealing with kids currently or looking to deal with kids. It's been a good study thus far. I know it has for myself, and I'm sure it has for the class as well. Tonight we're getting into a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, but I think we can look at it strictly from God's Word and glean something from this. So it's lesson 3 on page 13. Whatever happened to discipline? So, the first thing I want to get out of the way is discussing what I'm going to title the tools of the trade. Many of you will recognize these tools of the trade. Especially if you grew up probably in the 70s, 80s, even early 90s, you've probably worn one of these on your bottom a couple times. So I had never actually heard of this one referred to as the Board of Education. I thought that was kind of funny. Um, really? Yeah. So I'm sure we've all experienced the quote-unquote rod of discipline in the physical form from one of these things. So thought y'all might get y'all warmed up with some humor. Some of our kids, I think, today would be like, what is that? I know my kids are very familiar with this one and the top right one as well. So I have yet to pull out the tree switch, but anyway, hopefully that loosens y'all up. But we will be discussing, what does the Bible say about physical punishment when it comes to kids? Is it authorized? Excited to get into that conversation with you. Obviously, we know there are many opinions. There's many studies and questions surrounding discipline. There's a lot of books out there about discipline. I think one of the most common questions we'll talk about in this society is, should I spank my child? If so, what age should I start spanking my child? And when does it become ineffective? Some of you who get into the teen years, you start to realize that spankings don't really do a whole lot sometimes. They just make them angry. And I want to say this carefully. There are some really good expert books out there on parenting, and they have really good information. But I want to emphasize that these things are not the answer. Okay? These, again, good guidance, but the answer is provided for us in the Bible. God has given us the answers, and I think we will see that here shortly. I want to look at just this verse, Proverbs 13:24, because this is the verse that the book starts out with. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. What does it mean? What do these words mean? So I looked up and tried to look at what the transliteration of these. I can't pronounce any of that top line, but we can break it down together and see what these correlate to. So he who withholds or spares his rod hates his son. So each of these, this is how this breaks out. This next one is going to help a little bit more where I'm going with this. That shivto, or sometimes you'll see shivet, or however it's pronounced, his rod, is a symbol of discipline, not necessarily physical punishment. So, down at the bottom, the rod, or shivet in Hebrew, is a symbol of authority, correction, and discipline. It was used by shepherds to guide and protect sheep, not just to strike them. I think this is an important consideration when we read this verse, because I don't know if you were like me, but many years ago I'd read this and be like, well, that just means spank them. If I spare spanking my kid, that's a bad thing. So I never thought about the whole, what else does that word correlate to? This also sent me on a little bit of a rabbit hole chase, I guess. And I started looking into, okay, what other verses in the Bible use this Greek word to mean either physical punishment? Does it mean authority? Does it mean, where is it used and how is it used? As I was looking into that, I came across a study on Christ, and I kept thinking, well, my mind for some reason was thinking, well, he was beaten with a rod, right? And I'm trying to find this, and I look it up, and I was wrong. He wasn't beaten with a rod. What was he beaten with? Anybody? I know you two know. We talked about it yesterday. Any guesses? Still starts with an R. Reed. The word reed and rod are two different words. They mean two different things. So this is a total side point. Just letting you know, total side point, but interesting point. The shivet, as we said, or shivet, rod or staff, wooden, solid, and used for typically these three things you'll find in Scripture. Discipline. Rulership, as in a rod of ruling, a scepter. And for guidance, as we see in Psalm 23:4, your rod and staff comfort me. It is a guide, an authoritative image. Whereas the reed is a hollow stalk, like a bamboo or cane, lighter and more flexible than a traditional rod. So as we think about he's being beat with a reed, those who have been beat with a young switch from a tree, a flexible switch from a tree, it wraps, increases some pain, right? I think we can kind of correlate that a little bit, that the reed use may have some imagery here. I'm not saying it does, but it may have some imagery that, number one, they weren't even going to honor him enough to give him a rod or to beat him with a rod, because that would mean something tied to authority. Also, Jonathan brought this point up yesterday as we were talking about it. He's like, well, what was there to correct? If a rod is meant for correction, Jesus said there was nothing to correct. So maybe it was some sort of, providential thing that the reed was used, but the reed was also put in his hand. Why a reed and not a rod? Because a rod would mean authority. A reed would mean nothing. So just food for thought. There's some comparison or some contrast there in what these things would stand up for. The reed was simply for pain and simply for mockery. But a rod, while it does, in some cases we will see, induce pain, it could also be associated with rulership and guidance or protection. So just thought that was something kind of interesting that I came across that I wanted to share with you. So, verses that we see this word represent physical punishment. Can I get some volunteers here? Proverbs 10:13. Whoever gets there first, just go for it. Okay. 23:12 through 14. We're going to come back to that verse and study it a little bit deeper here in a few moments. Proverbs 26:3. Okay. In these verses, that rod is intended to mean of physical punishment, of a physical use for correction or reproof. Let's look at some of these non-punitives. Psalm 23:4. Okay, does that sound that the rod in that passage, does that sound like something that's used for a physical punishment? No, it is used for a comfort, for a guide. As we mentioned, a shepherd's rod would be used to guide. Genesis 49:10. Okay, so the scepter word is the correlation with rod, but it's a rule of authority, symbol of authority. So we do see the uses of this word, that rod, just as we mentioned before, in authority, discipline, and guidance, used in all three contexts. So, as we consider all that, with Proverbs 13:24, I think what we can gather, or what we can surmise, is that the verse is stating that withholding discipline from a child is not an act of kindness, but rather a form of neglect or even hatred, because it allows destructive behavior to go unchecked. And in contrast, true love for a child is shown by early and consistent discipline, which helps shape character and wisdom. I know that doesn't answer the in question directly, but we will answer it. So I'll tie this into it as well. If we just break it down even more simple, I think we come up with this. Discipline is the command. Early correction for long-term impact is the intent. Love is the condition. Consistency is key, and godliness is the goal. Does Proverbs 13:24 teach that I can spank my child? Or does it teach that discipline is necessary? I think if we had to answer one of those two questions, we would say it teaches discipline is necessary. Do these other verses, though, point us in a direction that say it's probably among the disciplinary actions? And I would say yes. That's where these verses lead me. Let's consider this. So we already read this one, but apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, that's a physical action, he will not die. If you strike him with a rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. Of course, we also see 22:13, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. The rod and reproof give wisdom. Blows that hurt cleanse away evil. So do stripes the inward parts of the belly. Sometimes you hear the funny saying that, pain in the rear sends a message to the brain or something like that. I don't know. But the goal of the physical punishment isn't just to cause physical pain. It's to what? It's to correct. It's to correct. So, I think that, oh man, did I break it? I broke it. I broke it, Brad. There's more than enough evidence and reference in Scripture to consider that discipline must be carried out and can be carried out in various ways, including physically. This is totally me, not the book. If you beat him, he shall not die. Spankings, when given in the right mindset and conveyed to a child that can understand now that pain will be associated with bad decisions, will not kill a child, but they can correct a child. I think that's what we can gather from all this, all these different verses, if we tie them together. And this right here is, I feel like, a huge part. We think about do not correct your child out of anger. Any of us who have maybe done that, and I'll just admit to you, there's times in life when I corrected out of anger. You get through with that, you look back on that, and you feel this big. Because you weren't calm and collected. It was just spanking to spanking. Maybe the child didn't even understand why they were getting spanked. You were just mad about it. That doesn't help the child learn. There's nothing learned from that other than dad hurts or mom hurts when they get angry, and that's not the message we want to send. Sorry, I'm really getting through this, but any comments or questions up to this point with anything that's been said? Because I know this is a sensitive topic for a lot of people out there. Thank you. Woo! I was like, I killed it. Yeah. No. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. So, early on in this class, the first couple classes, we talked a lot about uniqueness of children, individual personalities. Um, and to Nathan's question, I think we could ask any parent of multiple kids, and they would say, not every kid was disciplined exactly the same. It's one of those questions that's hard for people to answer because it's your child, and everyone's like, "Well, you'll figure it out, right? You'll get there, and you'll see what they need." But it's also nice to have someone say, "Well, this is the experience I had with mine. It may be your case, it may not." So, again, I was talking to Jonathan about this yesterday. I think Hunter was probably not even 2 when we started spatting his hand. Okay, and I say spat, right? Just a little, don't do that. Until he was able to associate that grabbing stuff and dragging it out of the pew and dropping it on the ground there in church was not good. And he did. At 2 years old, he knew, no, don't reach and grab. Bad things happen. They can learn at a really young age. Now, would it make sense for me to take him out and take my belt and just, probably not. I think we do have to consider, and we're going to see here in a minute, some things that really, really hit me pretty much, just emotionally to think about. Jonathan put it like this. I thought it was a good analogy. Anybody who's a mechanic who's dealt with this, if you have a tough spot on a car, tough nut to get off, you can't break it loose with the breaker bar, you don't just go straight to the torch. Some people might, but you might step it up a notch, right? Spray it with PB Blast, loosen up the nut, and then try again. And then you might try something a little bit more leverage until you get to the big guns. And you say, all right, this thing's coming off. Blowtorch time. Similar concept to kids. We don't want to just jump to DEFCON 5 in punishment. I think we got to give some grace. And again, these are little kids. Are we expecting them to learn on our level? I think we can be guilty of that. Like, you should know better, 5-year-old little kid, not to do this. Like, they don't know better. We have to give them some grace. And God does that with us now, still, all the time. Why are we not doing that with our kids? Great question, Nathan. It's something we will circle back around to a little bit more, but it is a hard question to answer. But great question. Any comments or other questions? Yeah. 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 Some children will associate a look with, okay, bad idea. And they'll get that early on. My daughter was one of those. Tate is not. Um, so, we do different kids, different personalities, different disciplines. Now, a couple things, again, that we'll see, we've already referred to. One is we still have to be consistent. I want to knock that out of the park. One thing that doesn't work, young parents. I want to say this carefully. I didn't write this out, so I can't really think about it. One thing that doesn't work is threatening without consequence. Okay? So I am not docking people who count. Don't take this the wrong way. But I once heard a guy say, sat there and heard the parents say 1, 2, all the way to 10. He said, well, I believe they could count to 100 before that kid would come back around. And their point was the kid knew that parent was just going to keep counting. There was no end consequence of the counting. Now, if you have a counting system that has a consequence associated with 10 or 3, and you hold up to that, you stick with it, it'll probably work because they'll know when they get to 3, it's bad. So we never did the whole counting thing personally, but since I had been studying this and thinking about these things, I thought, I wonder if my kids, what they would do if I just started counting. So Thatcher was doing something yesterday. He wasn't being bad, but I was like, hey, I want you to come in here and do this. And he's like, okay. And he started running around doing something else. I said, 1. He came running. He's like, what? I was like, well, it works. But they probably saw it somewhere else that did have a consequence tied to 1 or 3. Yeah. 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 Just my advice would be just have a consequence, right? Because parents that have no consequence, kids will just sit there and let them count. How high can you go? I don't have that kind of patience. Mm. Oh yeah. Yep. 100% agree and 100% experience this. I feel like it's almost similar to third child syndrome. So, what I mean by that is you have child number 1, they drop their passy on the ground. What do? Sanitized, hot steam bath, like before it ever goes in their mouth, this thing is spotless. Child number 3, it drops in dog poo, and you're like, you know. Similar with learning discipline and changing how, in some ways we think about, okay, we've been through a lot of serious, anxietous moments with our child number 1, maybe even child number 2. Child number 3, they're crawling on the edge of the deck, and you're just like, figure it out. I don't know if that's just what happens with parenting. Whether you get lazy or whether you just don't have as much anxiety over every little thing. But it can come into discipline because we can get lazy with discipline, or maybe we've just learned some lessons that we did wrong with it, and we're trying to change how we approach it. Yeah. Yeah. And when you begin to get questioned by older children about why you're not disciplining these little ones the same way when I did that, you spanked me. Why aren't you spanking them? See your favorite? Right now he is. You're certainly not. Oh, yeah. 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 Nah, yeah. Yeah. So, so was I once. Good thoughts, good questions. Anything else? Okay. Did y'all get something from Proverbs 23, 13:24 with all that? I wanted to think about it outside the box. I'd always thought it just meant just direct, spanking, but it just means multiple things. That correction, that guidance, that authority. Some really good thoughts there. But we have to use the full Bible and consider these other verses and how they are tied to things, and we can see that tied. So next time we get into some kind of those hot debates about, oh, you shouldn't spank your child, I do think Scripture points to that is something we can do, maybe even need to do many times, but there's also other options of discipline, because discipline's a broad spectrum. Oh yeah, we're getting into that. Good point. Yes, I think. Well, I'm pretty sure it's coming up in the next couple slides. If it don't, we'll come back. I'm pretty sure it does though. Man, this is. I think I knocked something loose. Works about every other time. Oh man, I gotta buy the church a new clicker. Okay. So this is from page 14 in your book. For those whom the Lord loves, He disciplines. This is just, sometimes you'll see little verses at the top or bottom that I'm throwing in here. So the author points out this: what is not being said as much as what is being. I'm sorry, I'm reading my next one. Sorry. 13, page 13. There is an inseparable link between love and discipline. There's another point that comes up. We'll talk about this, but remember, this is for a long-term goal. Initially, it is painful for the parent too. I want to talk about that just a little bit. Discipline is not always easy, guys, if ever really easy. If we're doing it for the right reason, to the right end, it's as painful for the parent as it is the child. Emotionally for the parent, typically physically for the child, but can be emotionally for the child as well. I say this, and I warn this, because it's easy for us to, again, make the threat without fulfilling the consequence or the end goal, because we don't want to have to hurt our poor little Susie, right? I don't want to see my little Thatcher cry. I don't want to, because it hurts me to see him cry. If we give in to that too much, if we're not careful and we never carry out the discipline, your child will call you out on inconsistency. It's been done in my house. If we're not careful and we're not consistent with things, they're going to see that a mile away, and they're going to notice there's inconsistency, and then they're going to notice they can get away with things. So you have to reel that in. You have to carry out the consequence. So, hey, I know we're on the car ride, we're on the highway. Used to, you could just be like, hey, I'm pulling over, you're getting a spanking. And we won't die when we do that. But now if you pull over and try to do a spanking, you're going to die, you're going to get the police called on you, CPS, whatever that is. So if we say, hey, I've warned you once, I've warned you twice, you kept doing this, you're going to get a spanking when you get home. Do we give them the spanking when we get home? Admittedly, I have not always done that. And I will tell you, it is not a good thing to do. You got to carry out the consequence that you give. They got to know that their decisions have a consequence and it's going to be carried out. Because God tells us there's going to be consequences for your decisions. Is He going to carry out those things? Absolutely. What are we teaching these kids? There's a consequence for your decisions. It's going to be carried out. If you do something illegally against the law, the police say you're going to go to jail. Are they going to feel bad when they get there and be like, I can't put you in there? No, they're going to put you in jail. There's consequences for the decisions. So, is it painful initially? Yes. It is hard for a parent to parent sometimes and to discipline sometimes. But you have to remember the long-term goal. This is for their long-term teaching and guidance and correction. And that's so important to remember. And honestly, there's moments that your children might even thank you for it. Maybe not early in life, but maybe some of you have had conversations with your parents where you say, I'm thankful for the teaching that you gave me or the correction that you gave me. because there's so many people that have gone off the rails. We've even had our own children come up and say, man, they needed to discipline their kid. Like, their kid wasn't being nice or was hitting them in the face nonstop, and they weren't doing anything about it. Like, I don't want my kids to do that. They might pick up on some things like that. But when discipline is fair, boundaries are clear, and the rules are plain, your child will grow up with a sense of peace and calm. I think this was a really good statement from the author, a really good thing to consider. We're looking at multiple things here. Is it fair? Do they understand what the boundaries are? Have they been established? The rules are plain. Are we expecting some high-level, thing from a young child? If we can kind of fit the mold within these things and discipline in the right mindset, this is the outcome. Your child will grow up with a sense of peace and calm. So this discipline will lead to good things. But we have to do it in the right way. We have to consider what God has asked of us. Patience, kindness, mercy, grace. We're held to a expectation as well as parents. We have a very big responsibility when it comes to discipline. We have to do it right. So I would challenge you, especially young parents who have not experienced this maybe yet, when your child starts really kicking back and pushing your nerves and testing your limits, and you feel that rage in your neck coming on, I would challenge you to wait a moment. Gather your thoughts and think about, what do the next steps look like before I beat you to death? Because they will test, some more than others, but we have to maintain composure, and that is really hard to do when emotions are high. So that would be my challenge to you. But that first statement, there's an inseparable link between love and discipline. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's true? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's entirely possible to think about it this way, guys. A few moments of discipline followed by a few hours of meditation. Because to Jonathan's point, I think sometimes when we do that, it's, did I do this right? Did I handle this discipline right? Did I go too far? Did I give enough? Those are great things that you're thinking about, because that means you're wanting to do it right, and you're thoughtful and you're intentional about it. Those initial moments, if you put those in place, look at it this way. You may be preventing years of potential pain in that child's future. Years where they're making bad decisions. Go ahead. I'm so proud of you right now. Right. Yeah. You think our children are the future examples. In our future, hopefully our future leadership and examples of Christ. Um, what does that look like? Does it look like just get my way because that's what my parents did, or does it look like respect? How much respect do you see among young adults today? Uh, Sadly, not much, and that speaks to the parents. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 And they're all like, "Let me get this for you, Dad. I'll clean the car for you. I'll make breakfast." So your point ties into this, and I'll conclude with this thought. Not being said as much as what is being said, um, the distinction between child abuse and godly discipline. Because discipline is taken to the extreme of brutality by a few, doesn't mean that the solution lies in the opposite extreme, which is a form of child abuse through neglect. So, child abuse, just as much as physical beating, could be neglect of discipline. Never thought about it that way. Thought the author made a good point with that. There's a chart on page 15 in your book that's a cool little chart to consider. So, guys, really appreciate the discussion. Good thoughts. Again, I really enjoyed the study of Proverbs 13:24. We could spend a lot more time on that, but we'll finish up this on Wednesday night. Appreciate y'all. I guess was it the second bell already? No. Okay. Well, I don't want to go to the next point because it's like. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. That's good, Tara. Good. She was like, I'm going to hold it for next time.